Now, this seems like too much information, but it's important for the story. I have the practice of waking up once a night to use the restroom. And I never wake up more than I need to get the job done and then go right back to sleep. So, again, important for the story. So, again, I'm new at this retreat center. I wake up, I'm making my way to the bathroom. I open up the door, I step out in the hallway, and I realize, and then all of a sudden, like I'm half asleep, but I'm like, something is wrong, and I hear click. And all of a sudden, I wake up fully, and I realize I'm not in the bathroom, I'm in the hallway. I grab the door, and I realized that I was locked out in the hallway. I was right across from the chapel, and there was nocturnal adoration happening all night, and these women were coming back and forth, and I couldn't just go to a room and knock on the door and say, like, hey, I'm in trouble, I need help, because these poor women had been hurt enough, right? So, and they thought the priest they had the previous year was creepy. So I'm like, I didn't know what to do. All my keys and everything were in the, So anyway, I went downstairs. People asked. I used the restroom first, and then I was able to make my way into the office right there, and I found a master key and was able to get back in, and that was that story. So, but anyway, just to offer up the connection with the story now with what we're doing here. And I'm so sorry, I missed a whole piece. Before I went down to the office, I realized I could make my way into the sacristy. So I couldn't go into the chapel because women were in there. I could not go to any store, but I could go to the sacristy. So I went into the sacristy, and I was able to put an alb on, right? And so that, in my situation, was a little bit improved, not perfect, but a little bit improved at that point. And then I went and got the key and that type of thing. The alb, what does the alb represent? Why do priests and deacons wear, and even altar servers wear albs at Mass? I'll give you a hint. Technically speaking, everyone could put an alb on when we go to Mass because of what it represents. Who could, for a random 80 points, what does the alb represent? The alb is the long white robe under everything. Oh, yes?
Prayer shawl.
Oh, it has the connotation of the prayer shawl. You're not wrong about that.
Is it like something like the baptismal garment?
It's a reminder of the baptismal garment that we receive at baptism, and it's an outward sign of our baptismal dignity. So it represents our baptism. And so really, in that retreat situation, the number one thing that the women, and it could be men, but in that retreat it was only women, the number one thing that they were struggling with was shame. They somehow committed this wrong, and then they themselves believed that they were bad somehow because of the wrong that they did, which shame is an un-Christian experience. It's good. Catholic guilt is a good thing, right? We do something that's inconsistent with our dignity and our Father's love, and then we feel guilty. That's a good, normal thing. But shame, we can never commit any sin that makes us less than who we are because we're loved by God the Father. Anyway, so it's interesting then, like I was in an analogy of shame, where I was walking around not able to connect with God and with other people the way I should. And what healed me of that was the alb. Then I was free to move around. It gave me a freedom. And so our baptism gives us a special grace to be free in the things of God. One of the gifts that we all have been given in baptism is the ability to discern God's will. We are made instantly God's children, right? And we're given the grace to be able to discern God's will or know what God's plan is for us, right? Now, we're all very familiar with the Our Father, right? It starts, Our Father, right? We acknowledge that we're God's children, that we have a Father in heaven that loves us, and that we're His beloved children. And then if we fast forward, in most of my life, I actually thought that the hardest part of the Our Father was forgive us our trespasses as we forgive those who trespass against us. Because it's hard to forgive, and if we're praying that His mercy is contingent on our forgiveness, there's been many times in my life I would have been in great trouble, right? I go back and forth between what I think the hardest part of the Our Father to pray is, and for a big chunk of my life, and actually when I was in college, the hardest part for me to pray was Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We're basically praying the way the angels and saints are attentive to your will, Father, we want to imitate that. And so in heaven, when God is just like, I could use a coffee, right? All the angels are just like, I'll get it. What do you want in it? Do you want, French vanilla? And the angels are just like excited to do whatever it is that God wants. And they're eager to execute. And that's really their only priority in existence, is to do the will of God the Father, and to do it eagerly, immediately, and with enthusiasm. And so for us praying, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven, we're saying, God, as they do your will in heaven, I promise you that I will do your will in my life, because we only have control of our own lives. We don't have control over all the earth. And so that's a very powerful way to pray. And if we should do so very mindful of what we are specifically asking. We're basically saying, Father, I'm going to make your plan for my life. I'm going to make your will the top priority in my life. And then we receive the grace to be able to do that. So how do we figure out God's will? It's a gift called discernment. We can only come to know God's plan if God gives us the grace to know it, right? And because of our fallen nature, we're going to resist God's will. So it's important to pay attention to that we all have a natural amount of resistance to doing God's will. The original sin was a rebellion against God, and we all have been infected by that tendency to rebel against the will of God, and that's called concupiscence. Oftentimes it's expressed by sin, which is outright rebellion, but sometimes our resistance to wanting to do God's will, it's the source of it is our concupiscence that we need to overcome. But so I want to talk about what something that Father Mike Schmidt kind of lays out, the three senses of vocations. I'm going to focus on the second sense, but just to lay it out there. The first sense of vocation, and we really talk about this in the Our Father very powerfully. It's the universal call to holiness. It's what we're supposed to be about every day. How is God willing us to pray? What are the specific things He's asking us to do in our day today in order for us to be holy that He's asking us to do? So it's the daily will. And then the second sense of vocation is what is your plan for my life? Oftentimes we hear about the four vocations, right? The married life, the priesthood, the religious life, and then we'll talk about this. Whether or not the single life is a full-blown vocation is a debated reality. So we'll talk about the intrigue in that type of thing. But and certainly the one clear thing is, all vocations fall under this universal call to holiness, which is actually the third one. The first one is daily, what's your will today for me, Lord? What are the things you're asking me to do today? Help me to discern what you're asking me to do. How am I to spend my time? Then, the sense of vocation. Lord, am I called to get married? Who am I called to marry? Am I called to religious life? Am I called to the priesthood? And then it's this general sense of holiness. Now, St. Ignatius of Loyola is considered to be the master of helping to bring about discernment. He was a great soldier, right? And actually, I think I mentioned it when I was here for a Sunday Mass. So, some of you heard my little explanation for him. He was a great soldier in the 1400s. And all he could dream about was being either a great knight or a great soldier and getting glory and fame that way. That was the plan he had in life. That was how he was motivated. Well, he was injured, his leg was wounded, he had to go for one surgery that nearly killed him, caused him to stay in a hospital bed for a long time. That surgery didn't fully repair the issue, and so he asked for a second surgery, which was kind of crazy, but to avoid having to limp his whole life, he asked for this second surgery, which caused him to be in months and months and months of recovery. What he did during that time was he was bored, and he said, give me stuff to read. And the only books that were popular at the time were Lives of Saints. So he was getting all these Lives of Saints. And he started to pay attention to what was happening in his soul, the things that were motivating him and animating him. And he started to realize that when he would think the thoughts about being a great soldier, he would get a type of consolation or a delight. Oh, I like the idea of being a soldier and that type of thing. But after those thoughts were completed, he realized he was left empty. And then he started, because of reading the lives of the saints, he started to get thoughts of being a missionary, of being a saint, growing in great prayer. And he said when he would think those thoughts, he was very impressed because those thoughts wouldn't leave him, after he thought of them, but he would have this ongoing sense of fulfillment. And he kept paying attention to what was happening with his emotions, what was happening with the things that he was thinking about, and what was the reaction that was happening in his soul. And he determined that there's three possible ways that we can discern God's will. One way, and I'll tell a quick story about this, is God can illuminate the soul. That God can, directly act in the soul and just make it clear, this is what my plan is for you, right? St. Paul had the experience of falling off the horse. That was kind of like that illumination that St. Paul had. For myself, I was actually praying in adoration one time, and I was fighting. I was a high school student, college student. I was 21 years old, going to Westchester University, studying accounting, and I was fighting tooth and nail being called to the priesthood. I didn't want it. Yet I was thinking about it all the time. And I was trying to do a daily holy hour, right? So I was trying to pray all the time, but not be open to God's will, which never works, right? So don't try that, right? I was trying that. So, and it was the clearest that God ever spoke to me. And it was a powerful illumination in my soul, where, he put a question directly on my heart. Oh, I think that's my pancreas. He put a question directly on my heart, right? And the question was, do you trust me? Do you trust me? And I talked to the spiritual director afterwards because I didn't actually think much of it. The image of divine mercy flashed very intensely in my mind's eye. And as soon as that question dissipated, the image of divine mercy flashed away. Now, I knew at that moment that I wasn't trusting him in this call to the priesthood. At one level, I had an assurance that I was called to the priesthood at that point. I didn't like it, but I kind of had like this insight that I knew clearly that I didn't trust him and I wasn't free to follow the call to the priesthood. And so I actually had to ask for the grace in order to be able to trust him. And fast forward, I went to the St. Jude shop in Havertown, and I was blown away when I saw the religious goods store and the rack. These are examples of the third way, the second way. God uses consolation and desolation to reorient us to a new equilibrium, which is his plan. So the first one is divine illumination. The second one is consolation and desolation. The third way is that when we're peaceful and we're presented with, an option, to be able to discern that based then on our good human faculties of reason. For instance, like, I'm peaceful, and this girl, she seems like she's the right girl for me. She's beautiful. I'm happy around her. Life is peaceful. We're in a good place for our finances. Everything seems to be working out and that type of thing. I don't have times of desolation around her and that type of thing. It's all there's just consolation. There's a peacefulness. God hasn't given me any particular signs in any way, but this simply feels right. And it makes sense. And so when we're peaceful, that's a time of blessing from God. And when we're peaceful and we're proposed with seeking his will and an option for doing his will, then simply using our rational ability to think things through. And if we continue in peace, that's a powerful sign that we're called to do God's will. And so this is how we're called then to seek God's will. These three ways can apply for our daily lives. We can come away from a retreat and God can reveal to us, like, I'm meant to do a holy hour every day, I'm meant to pray the rosary every day, I'm meant to go to confession. He can reveal those things for what we are called to do on a particular basis. And also this then is a powerful help for discerning God's will in general. So one of the basic questions and fundamental questions that every good Catholic should be open to this. And it's what's, St. Paul gives some insight. Somebody asked St. Paul, should we go out and get married? And at the time they didn't realize that the second coming of our Lord would be delayed. They actually thought it was going to happen in their lifetime. And St. Paul said this, He said, I don't have any particular revelation on this, but here's my thought, and it's an inspired scripture, so we know that the Holy Spirit intended this. If you're able not to get married, don't get married so that you can live in the state of living in the kingdom of God, demonstrating to everyone that, that Jesus is the one who brings fulfillment and joy and happiness, and that you're living, in a sense, what the reality that is to come for everyone, you're living right now. We talked about at Mass how we literally join with the angels and saints at every Mass. We're living an anticipated life of heaven every time we celebrate Mass. Well, this is what celibacy is, where it's meant to live the anticipated life of heaven here on earth. Jesus was asked the one question that the Sadducees didn't believe in the resurrection, so they were always trying to trick Jesus, and this one Sadducee was like, I got the perfect scenario. And he's like, so in the law of Moses, if a brother dies without any children, his brother has to marry the widow. And then if he dies, then the other brother has to marry. What happens in this one family where 7 brothers died, all married to the same widow? Who is she married to in heaven? And our Lord's just like, well, in heaven, we're neither given in marriage nor do we take marriage. That, that as intense and awesome as marriage is, and marriage is awesome and amazing, and it's a powerful revelation of Christ's love for the world, the way the spouses love each other. So marriage is absolutely amazing and very much part of God's plan, and in no way is this making marriage a secondary thing. But in heaven, the love that we're going to share with each other is so profound, it's so elevated, it's so amazing that the love that I have for you, that you have for me, and that we have for each other is going to be raised to such a level that it's going to go beyond what marriage was in this world. And so we're living that reality of the fulfillment of what heaven is. We live that in the here and now. I had a priest that was my spiritual director at the time. He's a great priest in the Archdiocese. Just to highlight that joyfulness in heaven and that level of love that the saints experience, he talked about this. He said, when you're in heaven, you're experiencing the joy of the beatific vision. You're seeing God in all His glory, and that's bringing you joy and delight. And also, you're experiencing the joy and delight that everyone else in heaven is experiencing. So he talks about then, in a situation where one more soul comes into heaven, well, they're experiencing the delight of the beatific vision, and then everyone else is increasing their joy by the increase in joy that this individual is experiencing. And not only that, the exponential growth of joy everyone gets to experience by one new person coming in. And it's just like joy upon joy, this level of connectedness. So, that fulfillment that God brings can be lived here in this life through the gift of celibacy, and that God calls some of us to. And so, how does somebody know if they're called to celibacy? How does somebody know if they're called to marriage? Well, let me tell you this. Everyone here is called to marriage, including myself. Deacon Remy's called to marriage. I'm called to physical marriage. We're all called to physical marriage because we're all naturally given physical marriage. So what celibacy, what it looks like is, I have the same desires to be married that I had before I became a priest, before I entered the seminary, and it all started when I was about 12 or 13, right? Those same desires I have, and wanting to be a father, wanting to be a husband, all of those desires are still there, and it's not like they get shut off. So, and everyone has that. So, am I called to natural marriage? I am. So, 100%. So, somebody who is called to celibacy has the call to natural marriage. What you end up discerning, though, is that God gives this special grace that St. Paul was alluding to. The grace to be able to give up as good as marriage is, and marriage is awesome and amazingly fulfilling and can lead people to great holiness. As good as marriage is, to have the desire, but I want to be a sign to the world that God's love is fulfilling, it's joy-filling, and it's sustaining, and it's enough. And I want to be assigned to marriages that if you're not living your marriage without Jesus being the center of it, your marriage isn't going to work. And then you discern that you have the special grace then to live celibacy, or perpetual virginity, or the radical act of charity, depending on what you're called to and that type of thing. So that's the difference between marriage and celibacy. Everyone that's called to celibacy should fully have an incredible enthusiasm for marriage. And to the point, every so often, I'll ask a guy that's coming before me, I'm like, so like, are you, what's the idea of like celibacy? Are you, is it a hard struggle for you, or what's going on? And every so often I'll be like, a guy will be like, well, Father, like, I really think women are more trouble than they're worth. And the kids are like, snot-nosed punks. And I'm like, and I almost like daydream that like I have like this button with a trap door in front of me, because if that's the attitude, if you're not enthusiastic for marriage, if you're not enthusiastic for women and children, then the foundation for celibacy is not there, because you're basically taking those natural good desires of celibacy and you're redirecting them for the building up of God's kingdom. And as awesome, and very much families are building up God's kingdom. So if you're choosing two different ways of building up God's kingdom, or basically called to a more radical way of building up God's kingdom, as important and awesome as marriage is. And there's a cross there. So like, do I miss the reality of having a wife and kids? Yes. But can I stand here in boldness and say, but God has fulfilled me in celibacy through ministry and prayer? Absolutely, it has been awesome. It is the cross, but it's very fulfilling. So then the question comes, okay, like I'm having this stirring, this idea of living radically for the kingdom of God is stirring up in me, or St. Dominic or whatever. And I love these saints. I want to emulate these saints, and I want to preach like St. Dominic did. I want to live in community and build up the community. Well, that's what a call to a charism looks like. And for a guy who's thinking about gospel priesthood versus religious life, what I always instruct him is that the first movement of that call, when you're called to religious life, is a burning desire for the charism should be a little bit more dominant than the idea of priesthood, though the priesthood can be linked to that. And so that's the call to religious life and that type of thing. And the challenge for all of us here is, what is God asking you to do? And are you willing and able then to, put the investment in prayer in order to be able to discern what God's will is? Both how you engage God's will daily, right? Give us this day our daily bread. Lord, tell me every day what you want me to do. Thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. And so, and for me, what I always tell, everyone who wants to see God's will, the two best ways to pray is before the Blessed Sacrament. I understand that every day from 3 to 7 that there's an exposition. Praying before the Blessed Sacrament and praying the Rosary. The Blessed Mother is the perfect disciple and the one who perfectly does God's will. And when our Lord was dying on the cross and said, to the beloved disciple, behold your mother, he gives us Mary to all of us to teach us in the ways of the faith and to teach us how to do God's will and execute God's will. And so praying to Mary, especially the Rosary, is such a vital part, because Mary will then instruct us in the ways of doing God's will. And then that quiet listening and exposition will dispose us to hear God's will. Oftentimes not even, during exposition, but other times all of a sudden you're hit with God's will. The idea of what's bringing consolation or desolation becomes clearer and sharper, and you're able to hone in on what God's will is in your life. So I just kind of put a lot out there, and would love to get questions to clarify things, or to go into things that's concerning you. Did that make sense, any of that? Some of it? Thank you, Jesus. So. But what questions do you have? Comments, concerns, disagreements? Yes?
Well, I just had a comment. I was at the hospital today, and I just went in bed for a patient, and we were talking about, she was Catholic and stuff, and I was like, oh, Reverend, please come in and talk about the sermon. She said, like, oh, you got to be a nun, and I was like, get that a lot. And then she was like, I was like, yeah, maybe you know. I was like, Father Delacey. She's like, oh, I love Father Delacey.
Thank you so much. Oh, well, thank you for that comment. That's what do you remember her name offhand?
No, yeah, I can't.
Oh, you can't tell. Okay. Yeah. Okay. We'll just edit that out, like so. Thank you. That's so cool. That's so cool. Will you see you tomorrow? Tell yourself hello. Okay. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Well, you know, and I guess just to ask the question there, you know, to all of us here, like, you know, especially there's a fundamentalness to that question of like, God, are you calling me to live out the gospel in a radical way and give up marriage? You know, why is that so hard? What's the challenge for that? Does anyone find that idea like easy? Like, Lord, if you ask me to do this, Lord, I will do it because, you know, I'm your beloved son, I'm your beloved daughter. If this is what you ask me to do, you got it. You know, like ideally, what I just said is where we should be. And I know I wasn't there when I was in college. I don't know if I'm there right now as a priest, but we'll edit that out. In terms of it's still a struggle and that type of thing. But you know, like what's hard about it? What would you say the struggles are? Yes.
What would you have wanted someone to tell you when you were really scared about the priesthood?
Oh.
When you were like rejecting it, didn't want it, like I don't know, in college or something. Like what would you say to yourself?
Yes, no, that's a great question, and I'll repeat it just to make sure that it can be heard. So, what would I have wanted somebody to say to me when I was fighting the priesthood, when I was scared about the priesthood, when I was running from the priesthood? What would have been important for me to hear at that point? I think the most important thing would have been for me to know that was normal and okay to be afraid and to wrestle and that type of thing. I actually was feeling a little guilty about like not just saying yes to God right away. And it really, you know, Israel in the scriptures, as Jacob wrestled with God, and then that's how he got the name Israel, one who wrestles with God, that I think all of us, in order to grow in our faith, there's a time in our lives where we end up wrestling with God. Almost like, it sounds like fighting a little bit, combating with God, going back and forth. And that's how we grow. And in being his son and daughter in some ways, is we have to kind of let him, at one level, I talked about how our concupiscence, our tendency to sin, our tendency to rebel against God, God has to fight that out of us. He has to take that on and defeat that in us and that type of thing. And that's what was going on at that moment. So being told to be told like that was normal and to remain faithful, that would have been a very helpful thing for me to hear at that point. So, and to keep praying, not that I wasn't praying through it all. I basically was clinging to God at that point, but just, thank you. That's a great insight. Yes?
I'm a religious brother, but I've also accompanied a lot of people that have both entered religious life, as well as those that have discerned towards marriage before entering religious life, and also quite a few that have entered religious life, and along the path, in the first few years, discern that actually, even though they had these initial callings and really strong inspirations, that actually God was calling them to the married life. One thing that I found that is sort of curious is a lot of times, especially at an initial call, when someone feels a lot of sort of enthusiasm, a lot of those things are also things that apply to all to that one universal call that you were talking about, that are actually in our baptismal call. We're all called to mission. We're all called to holiness, and it's not a bad thing, that sometimes that we might confuse that with a call to the religious life. There's this radicality. It's like only one of these paths is the real call to true radical holiness. I think it's really good actually to recognize that even feeling that enthusiasm, a lot of people called to married life are also called to that. Not anything that is saying like it's about picking petals off of a flower or something. I just thought I'd throw that out there.
No, that was excellent. I'll repeat just in case the camera didn't pick this up. But oftentimes those that are pursuing religious life or priesthood will have an initial enthusiasm, enter into the formation program, and then discern out, and then discern that they're called to married life, and praise God for that. And then every married couple is called to live out the gospel in a radical way and in a mission-oriented way. So just to say those two things. It's one of the reasons why, guys, when you go into formation with a religious community or in the seminary, there's a long period of time. Somebody that goes into St. Charles with a college degree, it still takes 7 years before you become a priest. And every religious community has a different length of period of formation. How long is the formation period in your community?
10 to 12 years.
10 to 12 years. So a very long period of time to really test it with the help of the church. So especially these kind of formal vocations, the one blessing you get is you get the church officially helping you in your discernment. And in some cases, the church itself will say, like, hey, it looks like you're forcing this vocation. You don't seem happy with it. It's not a fit. You're not thriving with it. And sometimes the church will tell the person, this isn't working. Like, you've been a seminary for 5 years and you're still dating. Like, it's not working. That doesn't happen a whole lot. Anyway. But that's not working and that type of thing. Or the person themselves, most of the time, the person themselves will say, like, I just don't feel like there's been now, like, after the initial enthusiasm, there's been this process of consolation and desolation, and then all of a sudden I find myself, like, that this doesn't fit. I think God's asked me to move forward. And then you get the help, and anyone that is in need of assistance with discernment, there's a lot of great resources here, and you guys have a phenomenal resource with the brothers and the deacon and Father Carlos here to be able to meet with, to help you to discern. The good news is we don't have to do this alone, that there are people that can walk with you and guide you in the discernment process. And also, it's just helpful to kind of get out of your own head, like, is this really God speaking to me, or is this my own voice? That's the number one question you end up getting. And oftentimes when you speak it out with someone else, that clarity, like, this is God at work in me, becomes all the more clear. And then just to have somebody who has been through a similar process to be able to affirm, like, this is normal, this is good, keep going forward, or this is crazy, like that, you need a psychological help. Whatever the situation, that rarely happens. But, to be able to get that, like, affirmation of what's happening is so very important. Guys, any other? Good, yes?
Could you talk a little more about just, like, more, like, practical ways that pray and, like, grow in discerning through consolation and desolation, even about, like, smaller things like your career, your major?
Absolutely, like those practical things. But we all should be discerning all of that, like, absolutely. So oftentimes, I come from a very Ignatian kind of spirituality and that type of thing. So oftentimes St. Ignatius would tell you to kind of, like, if you're discerning two things, let's say if it's like a career choice, like, do I go into, like, business or become a doctor or what, like, something like, distinct there. Well then, like, taking it to prayer, spending that time in prayer, and it can look like a variety of things. It could be Lectio Divina, it could be praying the Rosary, time before the Blessed Sacrament. There's a variety of ways to pray successfully. So I would say whatever works for you, as long as there's a component of quiet time. That's extremely important. And then St. Ignatius recommends use your imagination and place yourself in each of those choices, and then pay attention to how you feel. Oh, when the idea of being a doctor, I have tons of anxiety, but I'm peaceful about business. Well, then pay attention to that. Keep revisiting that in prayer a couple times, and then by that, the use of your imagination, the use of your placement with your imagination in that life, and then pay attention to your reaction. I'll start off by making an act of faith to God. Dear Lord, help me to come to know clear what your will is. Be very intentional that this is what you're seeking after, God. And then use your imagination to place yourself in both situations, and then just pay attention to how God moves you. That's a very important thing. When I first became, like, kind of, like, on fire, I went from being lukewarm to then doing, like, a daily holy hour and that type of thing almost overnight. And the one thing I would do, like, I would ask God every morning, Lord, give me a mission to do today, whatever it was. And I would believe, like, I never believed it was infallible. So some of the stuff I thought, like, well, I may be making this up, but in and of itself, it's not a bad thing to do. But I felt like that practice actually helped me to tune in to doing God's will in a more intense way. And there were actually several moments along the way that it was very clearly a profound movement that God gave me to do, as opposed to me just simply generating. The one thing that during that time, like I woke up, I'm like, Lord, what should I do today? And it was on my heart, call your cousin. Now this is a cousin that, like, you know, we were friendly, but I would never call this cousin. And I called that cousin that particular day, and she goes, this is amazing that you're like, why did you call me? Like, this is amazing that you're calling out of the blue. I'm going through a horrible time. I didn't know who to talk to. And it's great that you called because I feel like I could talk to you. And there were like other little moments along those lines. So you know, these things, you know, work like muscle, right? We have to exercise it. We have to build it up. And I probably shouldn't flex it, especially with the. Okay, can we edit that out? The chapel's this way, like nothing. All right, but anyway, it works like muscle. You work it out, it gets stronger and bigger, and that type of thing. And then you know, just doing those like little acts of docility, obedience, it makes us more responsive to God's will in the bigger things. So that those smaller things, that taking that discernment to the smallest possible thing. Now, and if my friend sees this, I make fun of her all the time. You know, like we have to be careful that we're not like overdoing it though. I one friend one time said like, I woke up today and God told me to get a massage. I'm like, well, wait a second, like getting a massage is not a bad thing. I'm doubting that God told me to get a massage. I'm just sorry. So we just have to be careful that we're you know, there's a seriousness and an elevatedness to this, but really make it real for every day. Does that answer your question? That's a great question. Thank you for that. Guys, you're so smart. Thank you.
So like you said, to like place yourself in like different scenarios, but for us, like it changes. I mean, like some of us are around like religious people all the time, and some of us aren't. And like marriage is something that we're very exposed to because we came from a union. And so how do you like place yourself, like would God reveal that to you in a sense of like being able to place yourself in a religious life if you're necessarily like not exposed to that? Yeah, no, that's a great question. And it's probably the biggest concern, especially for women discerning religious life, is there's this lack of exposure and that type of thing. So what I find is, because I've worked with women before who are called to religious life, it starts off as this initial hunger, and it's hard to kind of place it because there's been the lack of exposure and that type of thing. And then, you know, oftentimes there needs to be some research then in order to understand what the life is. And then every single community, just like every seminary, has like come and see weekends where you can actually go live with them and that type of thing. And then that may make things like clear, and it also gives you a living reality of a context of, okay, now I live with them, I've prayed with them, I have a good idea what their life is. And then at that point, I can, in a fully developed way, put myself in that situation. But prior to that, I would say it's asking a series of questions about, like, if you're feeling like a tug or a hunger for religious life, like there's easy, the first step would be ruling out. Okay, like, you know, a lot of women, like, they're enthusiastic about, like, communities that wear habits. Okay, like, so what I need to do with a community that wears a habit? Well, then that rules out some. Others are just like, I hate the idea of the habit, you know, and that rules out others and that type of thing. And then the question is like, what kind of work would I want to be like? Do I want to teach? No, I hate kids. But I don't get kids. I keep saying that. But I love kids. Kids are awesome. Don't hate kids. And, you know, but like I'm not enthusiastic to teach, but I would love to be in the medical profession. Well, then that rules out a lot of communities, and then you hone in and then research those communities that would fit whatever that profile is, and then try to put yourself, you know, using your imagination, actually going to live with them. You know, that's even better than the imagination, because then you're actually like spending a weekend with them and engaging them in that type of thing, and then through that process, you'll get a chance to know. Does that answer your question? Great question. You guys are so smart. Other questions? Oh, I was at Temple's Newman Center last week, and they asked like 10 great questions. We're only up to like 8 good questions. I'm just saying, it's not a competition, but thank you so much for being awesome, and an honor and privilege to be here.